The new look Maple Leafs get a win in the debuts for Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs get the 5-1 win over the Montreal Canadiens. And Dave, I think, we're in agreement here. This podcast is mostly going to be about Ryan O'Reilly. This may be the one of the few post games we do all season where we barely talk about the action on the ice, because it's really the talk and the conversation about the move off the ice that the Maple Leafs made the night before. So before we get to all the Ryan O'Reilly stuff, your quick thoughts on the 60 minutes of actual hockey that we watched this evening.
Yeah, pretty dominant, especially those first couple of shifts. Ryan O'Reilly's line on the second line, starting things out, and the way he was able to create on those first couple of shifts. I don't think Montreal got out of their own zone until about a minute 45, give or take. After the opening face-off, Toronto was just relentless there. And, all three of those guys, Marner, Tavares on the wing, and O'Reilly have all played together at Worlds before. So there was a little bit of established chemistry, and it kind of made sense for a lot of reasons there why, without a practice, without anything, someone like Ryan O'Reilly is able to come in and just have an immediate impact. And so, it was kind of looking like it was going to be one of those games where Toronto was going to get a lot of chances, but if they didn't capitalize, Montreal could have burned them. And then when Josh Anderson opened the scoring, it looked like that kind of script was happening again, because Josh Anderson always scores against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Seems to be kind of a rule. But Toronto got it together, really came out guns a-blazing in that second period as well. And the rest is history. This game was really never in doubt after Pierre Engvall made it 2-1. At that point, Toronto was in full control in that second period. And William Nylander getting his team-leading 31st goal of the season as well. Bunting scoring twice. David Kampf rounding out the depth with his fifth, scoring the first time in a very long time. All in all, there's really nothing to complain about in terms of the performance. Excited to see what this team does against a team competing for a playoff spot. Not tomorrow against the Blackhawks, but following that against one of Ryan O'Reilly's former teams in the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah, I thought Ryan O'Reilly was going to get the full Maple Leafs experience in this one with all the hype heading in, and then only to see Josh Anderson score against the Maple Leafs and lose to the Montreal Canadiens. Seems to be sort of the script that has gone on the last few years. Pretty wild. I just looked it up, but that's now Josh Anderson's 13th career goal in 30 games against the Maple Leafs in the regular season. It's pretty remarkable, considering he doesn't have more than 10 goals against anyone else. He's got 9 goals against the Winnipeg Jets. So loves playing the Leafs. Right. Of course, a guy from just down the street, I believe, is from Burlington. So he's got a lot of friends that are big Maple Leafs fans, so he always loves sticking it to them. But Toronto getting the last laugh in this one. And as you said, after Pierre Engvall made this a 2-1 game, the Leafs were pretty much able to pull away. That third period very non-eventful from a Montreal side of things, as the Leafs were able to shut the door and they move on to Chicago on Sunday night. But it is the Ryan O'Reilly podcast. Of course, this deal went down late Friday night, so we didn't get a chance to do a podcast. I know you talked about it pre-game. You were there for the availability during the morning skate as well, where there, I'm sure, was a ton of media from all different walks of life, if you will, that showed up to Scotiabank Arena this morning.
Montreal's one of the few teams that still travel very well in the media. And even when there's really nothing to travel for. And so it was a very busy media room inside Scotiabank Arena for sure.
Yeah, as you know, there's very few nights or mornings, I should say, where there's that many media. It's generally the first game of the season and playoffs. That's generally where people show up. But during the season, when big-time deals go down, big-time trades or moves are made, then the media comes out in droves. But before we get to the game in itself with Ryan O'Reilly and the impact, let's start from the beginning. I know where I was last night on Friday night. I was on my phone around 10 o'clock or so, and things start to trickle out as far as reports go from the insiders, and I'm thinking, okay, this is interesting. And then all of a sudden it just comes down on the Twitter timeline, the Maple Leafs tweeting out the deal with St. Louis and Minnesota for Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari. And it's so funny because nowadays with Twitter, I mean, you have to be so careful with, what you see as far as quote unquote, official Twitter accounts. They have changed it now where, what is it, companies and such, they get the golden check mark. So you have a better idea of
Yeah.
whether they're actually verified or not. But I still had to do a triple take and make sure that it was actually the Maple Leafs Twitter account that was putting it out. And once I did, I thought, holy bleep, this is a crazy deal. That's a Friday news dump, if there ever was one. But, my initial thought was, this is a big time move. And I have said previously on this podcast that I would have preferred the Maple Leafs to go out and get someone that is having a really good season and in the midst of a strong year. And that hasn't been the case for Ryan O'Reilly. He's underperformed. He's coming back from injury. But, the last 3 games with St. Louis, I think if you'd watched them, if you'd had read about them or just gotten any sense of what he was doing in those 3 games, it looked like the old Ryan O'Reilly. And I wonder how much of that played a factor into the Maple Leafs wanting to pull the trigger here. So I'm not backtracking and saying, that I think this is a move where you're getting a guy who's at his peak because he's just working his way back. But, now that I've had some time to think about it, I just don't know how this isn't a no-brainer type of move for the Maple Leafs, not only to get Ryan O'Reilly to solidify that top 6 and potentially the top 9, but you add in a Noel Acciari as well. And we'll talk about him coming up later. But this is just a home run move for me. And outside of Timo Meier, I'm not sure you could find a better fit for this Maple Leafs team.
Yeah, I mean, look, there could be a lot of debate as to who should have been in that top 6, perhaps as a center or left winger or whatever they were going to kind of do in that regard. But you really can't go wrong in Ryan O'Reilly in that regard, going up the middle, allowing for that kind of depth to move John Tavares to the wing. But we're going to talk in depth about Acciari a bit later on, but he is absolutely key to this deal in alleviating any concerns about the package going back. I don't think this happens without him and that many picks going back the other way, because when you look at that group of players that are kind of involved, and you could get like a Ryan O'Reilly equivalent or someone else or from some other team. But if you're going to get 2 quality centers like that, they're going to come from one team in one trade. I mean, it's technically 2 trades because of the third team broker in Minnesota, but that's really the key to it. If you're going to do all those and give all those picks, you're getting a great center and you're getting an additional depth center that even according to Sheldon Keefe, players were even more excited about him. Noel Acciari has got quite the experience against the Toronto Maple Leafs in that 18-19 playoff series with the Boston Bruins. He was a thorn in their side. His nickname is Cooks. He's a very difficult guy to play against. And you could just tell from Sheldon Keefe's excitement that getting a quality player like O'Reilly, but also getting Acciari gives 2 natural centers, like a depth that they have just not really had at that position. We talked at length about how much I thought they needed a third line center, and they ended up getting a second line center and a third line center, or a first line center and a third line center that they can really mix and do a lot of different kind of things like they did tonight with moving Tavares on the wing for we'll see how long. But just an incredible amount of depth, and Ryan O'Reilly certainly being the key to it. There's not a lot to say more than what's been said about his pedigree and being able to get the job done, being a Conn Smythe Trophy winner. And he's the first Conn Smythe Trophy winner the Leafs have acquired since Jay Shiger.
Baby.
Positions, very different positions, very different times, very different circumstances in terms of getting those players. But you could just tell when Sheldon Keefe was asked about, the return in the haul that they got at the deadline in 2022 and 2021. This is different. This is getting guys who are ready to win now. And it's a real statement. It's the same statement they made in 2021 where they are going all in for it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. They only have a 5th and 6th round pick next year. So there's not a lot to do in terms of the draft goes. They have pretty much their prospects that they want to keep, but beyond those prospects, it gets thin. So they've got to make this year work. We've been talking a lot about the fact that this is Kyle Dubas' final year of his contract. But the Ryan O'Reilly, you can't go wrong with that in conjunction with what they got with Noel Acciari and the incredible amount of depth center that they've had that they've just not had in quite some time.
I know a lot has been made about the steep price that the Maple Leafs made here. You look at the two players that they gave up, Mikhail Abramov, a former draft pick by the Maple Leafs who just hasn't really panned out right now. Adam Gaudette is a guy that's bounced around for numerous teams now and hasn't been able to crack this Maple Leafs lineup. With all due respect to those guys, not players that I think the Maple Leafs are going to be missing anytime soon. They've had so many other players they've called up already that can play in the bottom six. I just don't think those guys were in the plans. With regards to the draft picks, you give up a first, second, and a third, and then what was it, the fourth round pick to Minnesota for the 25% retention. So, the first round pick, it was always going to be, in the bottom third, of course, depending on where the Maple Leafs finish. You don't want to be giving up draft picks all the time. The Maple Leafs have done that for numerous years now. But as Kyle Dubas has pointed out, they didn't have to touch any of their prospects in this deal. And the truth as well, I think you look at the potential trade targets that are out there. And, I already mentioned Timo Meier as being in a tier really by himself as far as forwards go. After that, it gets pretty thin. Patrick Kane, I think we all had that conversation the other night, and based off of that performance, I don't think a lot of people felt great about that coming out of that matchup against Chicago. But beyond that, it's guys like Tyler Bertuzzi, it's guys like Sam Lafferty, Nick Bjugstad, Ivan Barbashev on St. Louis. And the truth of the matter is, as solid as some of those guys are, they don't have the ceiling and, game-changing ability that Ryan O'Reilly has on both ends of the ice. Like a lot of those guys that I just threw out there really are only offensive players. I mean, you're not playing Patrick Kane on the penalty kill. You're not playing him, up a goal necessarily with, 2 minutes left in the third period. Like you're going to have a guy like Ryan O'Reilly out there in big defensive moments. So to be able to have, one of the best 200-foot centers in the game, I think people are kind of overlooking that right now, that you've got someone that can impact the game in so many different levels as opposed to just offensively.
And the big thing there is, look, how many times have the Leafs grabbed someone and they've said he can play center, he can play wing. But then for whatever reason or another, it's usually the wing where they're better, and because the center, they can play, but it's not their natural position. And it kind of seems to throw everything in flux, and there's just no consistency in the lineup. And we've seen that exposed when Austin Matthews was hurt. This year, they didn't look very good in terms of their center depth and the things that they were trying to do. And so I think that was a real indication and a real turning point for the Toronto Maple Leafs, despite the Meyers, despite the Canes, to just kind of look at what's out there and what's available and what they can do in one fell swoop and just get the center position right. Because there's just, look at every other team that has won a Stanley Cup, and you can always point to their tremendous depth at the center position. And, you can make the argument now that the center depth is the best it's been under Keefe. And even under Babcock, it's probably been the best since that first year with John Tavares when Nazem Kadri was the third-line center and was a pretty good third-line center. But, discipline issues in the playoffs and things kind of forced his way out. And they got Alex Kerfoot instead, who was a winger that could play center and as good as, and he's still a valued member from a versatility standpoint. And so is Calle Yarncroke. But it's pretty clear that they just don't want these versatile guys that can play center anymore. It's just not going to cut it for the playoffs. And wing depth is just not that it wouldn't help, but it wasn't the right allocation of resources. They really needed help up the middle with guys who are just undoubtedly really good centers. One from a bottom six standpoint, and Acciari, who has a great track record in the playoffs, particularly against the Leafs, and Ryan O'Reilly, because his pedigree speaks for itself. So I think they've come to the realization that forwards can be moved around, and the center depth is something that they absolutely were still lacking on, despite all these quote unquote versatile players that they've just had, but just for whatever reason, couldn't get a proper mix for the bottom six.
Well, it was a whirlwind day for Noel Acciari and Ryan O'Reilly, but they were able to show up on time and get into this game against the Montreal Canadiens. Let's hear from Ryan O'Reilly, who spoke about putting on the blue and white for the first time in his NHL career.
Yeah, absolutely. My parents both grew up in Toronto. My wife's from here. I watched a lot of ties here. Always thought about it, but never really thought it would actually happen. So it's still kind of shocked that I'm actually playing here and such. But again, to have my boys too, at their age, are kind of starting to understand hockey. It's so cool to be able to share it with them. And wish they were here, but I know they're excited to come here.
What's it like to come to a team that has designs on winning a Stanley Cup and got you for that reason?
Yeah, you can tell just the energy in the room and in between periods, the way guys are, and the focus and the detail they put in. You just tell it's they're trying to win, and it's something to be for myself, it's fun to be a part of. Just that mindset, and you can see it's just a collective group, and obviously there's tons of work that has to happen still, but it's just rejuvenating to kind of be around that kind of energy and such.
Yeah, and I think you can just tell from Ryan O'Reilly's comments there and, some of the clips that we've seen, he's had a big smile on his face pretty much all day, even though it's been so busy and I'm sure very taxing on his body to eventually playing an NHL hockey game. I can only imagine what that would be like. But, this is a guy that's from the area, grew up a Maple Leafs fan, has always dreamt of this, and he's doing it. Yet again, another Southern Ontario GTA type of guy that is putting on the blue and white sweater. We, of course, have seen that a lot in the past couple of seasons. But, no offense to a guy like Nick Foligno or even a Mark Giordano, who's been fantastic this year and was really good coming over last season. I think if you're, some of the players around this room, this is really the first deal, during the Matthews era where you're getting a guy at the deadline that's a legitimate game changer. Like the other guys were, maybe Jake Muzzin might have been the last guy that was a legitimate game changer for the Maple Leafs. And, unfortunately injuries cost him in the playoffs and knocked him out numerous times. But, this is the first time that the Leafs, under the Matthews, Nylander, core four era, this is a guy that's stepping in that's, potentially joining that core five, right? Like everybody else has been more of a role player or a complimentary guy for the most part. And, I'm sure for them to see this, it's pretty exciting.
I kind of joked during this game that they didn't try the 5-forward power play with Ryan O'Reilly as the fifth. Having Ryan O'Reilly replace Morgan Riley and do a 5 forwards that way. But I'll digress on that. Sheldon Keefe talked about the fact that with their other trade deadline acquisitions and other guys that they've got, there was always that kind of talk that we think they can be good playoff players for us. But in Ryan O'Reilly, they have someone who has been a good playoff player. Like he's done all that other stuff, and also pointed to the fact that it's rare when you're getting a guy whose career points per game in the playoffs is much higher than it is during the regular season. And I think that's the mentality. That's the game-changing difference. That's that X factor from when it switches that the Leafs found was the difference here. Because, Nick Foligno, he was experienced. But with the Columbus Blue Jackets and everywhere else before that, hadn't really necessarily gone deep. He had all the leadership qualities. They picked up a captain. He was a bit of a different player than what the Leafs have had. And so for them at the time, it made sense. Was it the right call? Obviously, revisionist history says it wasn't, because we'll never really know. He got hurt. And remember in the playoffs, they had to play him at center because after the John Tavares injury, they just had no depth in the position. It was still an issue. So, you can go back to all those experiences like we were talking about before, why this is different. A game changer, a guy who's won a Selke, a defensive forward, a Marchand type guy, but a guy who's won the Conn Smythe, a guy who's won the Cup in 2019, and the guy that can really propel and push the guys forward. So when you're able to bring in someone like that and it can help push Tavares to the wing, it speaks an immense volume of the type of caliber player that you're getting.
All right, it's time to talk about the fun stuff now. And Sheldon Keefe mentioned it this morning during the morning skate news availability that he had trouble sleeping last night trying to figure out all the different lineup combinations that he could put together. And there was a ton of anticipation coming into tonight, would Ryan O'Reilly be the third line center? Would he be the second line center? Would he be the second line left wing? And ultimately, he lands as the 2C with John Tavares on his left wing and Mitch Marner on his right wing. Here is Sheldon Keefe talking about that decision that he made.
In terms of the decision to play him there, I know it's something I would have tried at some point for sure, and we're going to give it some runway. Thought that setting up O'Reilly and Acciari both in terms of playing their natural position, playing at center, and then in O'Reilly's case in particular, playing with two of our top guys, it just helped put him in a good spot here on arrival. And then, John and I, over my tenure here, we've talked about him playing wing at different times. We haven't really had the depth at center to be able to give it much of a look other than the odd shift here and there. So for all those reasons, it just made sense for me to just start with it right out of the gate.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately, I think Sheldon Keefe made the right decision here. You've got two guys that are traveling. The last thing you want to do is, make it even more difficult on them. They're coming to a new team with new surroundings. The last thing you want to do is put them with, line mates they're not familiar with or positions that they're not familiar with. So it did make sense to have Ryan O'Reilly play at center. Made sense to have Noel Acciari play at center. And funny enough, that first shift with Ryan O'Reilly, Mitch Marner, and John Tavares almost ended in a goal by Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah.
I think would have been one of the most amazing moments in recent Maple Leafs history to have a guy scoring in the first minute of his debut, coming off a massive trade from another team. But I think you could see it there, like the potential that this line has. You talked about it already, that, O'Reilly is familiar with Mitch Marner and John Tavares, having played at World Cups and World Championships before. But the hockey IQ of that line is just through the charts. And none of those guys are ever going to be the biggest or the fastest, but they're the smartest out there every time they step on the ice. I think you're going to be hard-pressed to find a smarter trio of players in the NHL that are currently playing together. I know it's just one game, and maybe Sheldon Keefe decides to move Ryan O'Reilly around a little bit, but I know maybe the numbers didn't jump off the chart tonight when you look at the analytics for that line, but just seeing some of the moments that they had, it definitely makes you feel excited about what they could do moving forward here with a little bit more time.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's kind of unfair to judge the numbers without a practice, without a lot of the different things that go into the game when you're also traveling, and it's a pure adrenaline high. I'm actually curious to see how this line does tomorrow, given the travel that both of these guys did, and the just shot of pure epinephrine, like that adrenaline rush that like you get from good news, where you have that jump in your step and you don't have time to think and process everything, you just do. But then traveling to Chicago, playing again, letting the body wake up and see if like that it hits them, and then they've got to try and have that jump again in their step. And I'm really curious to see. It won't be a full practice, right? They won't be on the ice, so it's going to be another one of those they're going to have to try and establish the chemistry. So I'd be surprised if the lineup changes very much from what we saw tonight. But yeah, it's there's a lot of potential there. I think a lot of people, we were kind of playing that game with the Rink Wide Toronto viewers, the listeners, or the viewers on the YouTube channel about what do you think the line should be? Like, does Ryan O'Reilly fit as the third line center guy, and you can kind of spread the wealth, and then do you move Camp down and you move Acciari to the wing? That didn't really make sense to me because, I thought Acciari would be a good third or fourth line center, and you've got that, so why not load up on the top six? And so that's what they've done. That's kind of what Sheldon Keefe likes to do. He really likes to load up the talent and overload, especially in certain situations. You'll see late game situation adjustments as well. It'll be interesting. Chicago again. That game against Chicago, and the energy level that was here was really low on Wednesday, and I can't believe how different that was to how crazy today was. Like, there was no happy medium. This is a game where some good stuff happened. There was one of the worst games to ever watch, even though they won on Wednesday against the Blackhawks, to one of the craziest high event games because of what happened off the ice, but also the enthusiasm from the crowd, the fact that it's Toronto, Montreal on a Saturday night, and you've got a lot of reasons to be excited for as a Leaf fan that have really made it a crazy 24 hours.
Yeah, and with regards to Ryan O'Reilly potentially as the 3C, if he's the third line center, I mean that's an elite spot for him, getting to go up against potentially bottom six lineup matches against other teams, and I just this honestly just crossed my mind right now, but I wonder if in a playoff series, depending on whether or not you have last change, might make Sheldon Keefe want to go that way. He is a guy that loves putting his lines in a blender. He's not afraid to do that, of course. So maybe at home you do load up the top six with Tavares, O'Reilly, and Marner because you got a last change. But on the road, you put Ryan O'Reilly out there at 3C with a Pierre Engvall and a Calle Yarncroc, and you potentially get an advantage on the road with having him up the middle, centering a line like that. So, maybe that's a combination or a situation we might see Ryan O'Reilly play in moving forward here come the playoffs. But, Sheldon Keefe said he's just got so many different options now, and he's really excited about what he can do with this lineup. And we saw tonight as well. Ryan O'Reilly can improve the second power play. I know you were joking about PP1 and maybe having him up there, but I think, the benefit of O'Reilly is that even in St. Louis, he wasn't always getting top power play minutes. So, he's not someone that you feel is going to be slighted by being out there on the second power play unit. And he can be someone that, is the trigger man or someone that you run a power play through. We saw him in the bumper spot there tonight, but I know it was off the rush, but a nice pass to eventually set up the Michael Bunting power play goal, or it might have just happened right after the end of the power play. But, that's another aspect that he can provide because, that second power play unit has not been great pretty much all season long. It's all about PP1 and pretty much that's it. But if you can have Ryan O'Reilly out there after the first, minute 15, going out there, I think that's a big boost as well.
I wonder if this is the catalyst to actually try not overload on those power plays anymore and maybe spread the wealth a little bit more. Like if you've got that talent on PP2, try using it. It's not like Jason Spezza late in the career kind of talent. This is a guy who's still relatively in his prime. So, use it, drive that. If that means taking one of the guys from the PP1 and moving him to a PP2 like a Nylander, and then moving one guy up and just going even split and preserving the guys, I don't see the harm in that. Will they do it? I'm not sure. I don't think so. Like it's not something that's usually in the cards for Sheldon Keefe, but he's not really had this spread of talent before from an offensive standpoint that you could really run two PP1s in this case and kind of split them 50-50. So maybe the experimentation will go there. Spencer Carberry is obviously going to have a big say in all of that. But there's a lot of potential there. And like you said, it's a guy who's not necessarily used to getting PP1, but also playing on a team where they split it up a little bit more. So curious to see how it'll all balance out.
It was interesting to see as well. I'm not sure if you got a chance to catch the clip. They did show it post-game on Hockey Night in Canada on the broadcast. But before that last power play that the Maple Leafs had, where Sheldon Keefe threw out power play 2 to start things off to kind of give those guys a bit of a cookie, Ryan O'Reilly's out there on the ice with the 5-man unit, basically like, not barking out orders, but he's trying to talk to everyone about where they're going to be positionally, kind of draw things up. And this is a guy that just showed up today. So it just shows you, the type of, gravitas that this guy has, the resume that he can just come to a team as a former captain, as a Stanley Cup champion, and guys are just going to listen to him because they look up to him, right? Like they know that he's the real deal. And it's pretty rare, I think, to see a guy just kind of step in where, he can immediately kind of call the shots, if you will. Like I'm not saying that he was, but that's kind of the sense that I got from seeing that clip without knowing what was being said, that, all 4 other guys were just standing there listening to him talk before that power play. So just kind of gives you a sense of the pull and respect that he, draws in a locker room.
Yeah. And look, I mean, you kind of had that on the defensive side with Mark Giordano when he came here last year. I think there was an immense respect from the rest of the D-corps in terms of what he was able to bring and the way he was able to kind of communicate with guys like Timothy Liljegren, I think is a huge step for why Liljegren has made the big progress that he's made in his career, both at the end of the regular season last year and especially this year in the role that he's been able to play. And so that's some of the residual effect the Leafs are banking on. That you bring in a guy like that, and whether he stays long term or not remains to be seen. But guys can learn. Guys can learn from playing with those different type of players and bringing a different dynamic. It's a curious one, but yeah, you don't get concerned, but at some point or another, you wonder, will this all work, and can they all fit it in? Because it's so much of the same thing in terms of like another captain and whatnot. But it's really hard to see any negative to the situation. If a guy who comes in with that kind of caliber is coming in and being assertive, not aggressive, but assertive in instructions, there's going to be a command of respect. There's nothing audacious about what he's saying or doing based on who he is and where he comes from.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan O'Reilly doesn't seem like the type of guy that's, is going to come into a situation and start, calling the shots on what music is going to be played in the dressing room, or yeah, he's not going to just all of a sudden take over the stereo and, rip the C off John Tavares and, stitch it onto his own sweater. Like, I can't see that happening. This is a guy that's, been with a few other teams. So it's not as if he doesn't know what it's like to join a new squad. But, this is a little bit different coming.
He's also a recent captain. Remember, he took over when Alex Pietrangelo left St. Louis during that Cup year.
Right. Yeah, so obviously he knows, what it takes to, keep a dressing room together and not let things, get too out of hand. So I think there is a big aspect to that. And, clearly Kyle Dubas values the intangibles, picking up yet another captain from another team. All right, coming up on Rink-Wide Toronto post-game, we will talk about whether or not Kyle Dubas is done wheeling and dealing. We'll also talk about Noel Acciari, the other piece in the deal with St. Louis, and Joseph Woll with maybe one of the quotes of the year post-game when he was talking about the Ryan O'Reilly trade and how he found out about that. You don't want to miss that clip. It's all coming up here on Rink-Wide Toronto. Maple Leafs get the 5-1 win over the Montreal Canadiens in O'Reilly and Acciari's debut. It is Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. It is Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Is your online business ready for the cookie-less future and set to properly capture your customers' valuable first-party data? Hey, it's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit. So you can find out just exactly how ready your website is for the cookie-less future. Your online presence has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
Naslund.
We weren't afraid of facing any line or any deep pairing because we knew that we would generate offense.
Bertuzzi.
I was like, I can play in this league and I can play a big role in this league and I can be dominant if all the stars align.
Morrison.
There was a confidence that we believed if we went out and played the way we were capable, we could score every shift.
Their story in their words. Unreal West Coast Express. Available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who was at Scotiabank Arena. Leafs getting the 5-1 win over the Montreal Canadiens, their first win over the Habs this season. But of course, all the talk is about the Ryan O'Reilly deal. Included in that, Noel Acciari. We will hear from the new Maple Leafs forward as far as Acciari goes in moments, but time for the Bodog line of the day. And Dave, if we were to bet on whether or not Kyle Dubas is done wheeling and dealing before the trade deadline in early March, are you putting your money down on yes, or are you putting your money down on no? Is there something left for Kyle Dubas to do with these 2+ weeks?
Yeah, I'm putting my money on yes. There's at least one more deal. It could be minor, very depth for all I know, but I do believe that there will be at least one more deal. I'm not sure exactly how they'll do it without losing a roster player, because they only have the 5th and 6th round picks remaining this year. And I don't believe they have their 2nd rounder next year either. So, I mean, I guess they have their 1st round next year, but do they really want to start doing that and playing that dance? I'm not sure. At some point or another, they have to start stocking the cupboard. And I know they've got prospects kind of waiting in the wings, but then after those guys, what do you have after that? And after a couple of years, you know, there's nobody outside of Yarncroke and Riley. There's no one signed beyond 25-26. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on as well. So, yeah, I think there'll be at least one more deal. Probably on the defensive side, maybe. And then seeing how the Matt Murray thing plays out, I know that they've kind of dismissed goaltending depth, but if it becomes a problem between now and then, maybe they do a Riddick type of transaction. I know, you know, Eunice Carpasalo is very cheap, and a guy on an expiring that could really help from a depth standpoint. Whether he could be the 3rd depth guy, I don't know. He has experience beating the Leafs like Acciari did, like in the 2020 playoff series in the bubble here. So, yeah, I think, you know, based on the fact that Kyle put up such a smoke screen when we spoke to him last week and then totally did pretty much everything that wasn't what he said, you can't dismiss anything. You can't dismiss any possibility at this point.
Yeah, I would be surprised if he doesn't do at least one more deal. You know, this was the home run swing that he was going to take. I don't think we're going to be seeing that as far as another deal for the Maple Leafs. If anything, maybe it's a bunt single against the Shift to try to, you know, pick up another piece here. And it would seem to be, you know, a defenseman, maybe a goaltender, like you said, if he really feels like Matt Murray isn't going to be, you know, up to par the rest of the way here. But it does seem like the forward group is pretty much solidified. They've been trying so many different guys in that bottom 6, but, you know, to get Noel Acciari as part of this deal, I think, you know, goes to show you that they felt like they could kill 2 birds with one stone with this St. Louis trade. So I would be surprised if they go and make another move for a forward. And like you said, if they do make another move, it most likely has to be money heading out. So maybe it is one of the forwards that has to move out in order to make a deal for some help on the back end to get an upgrade there. But yeah, still plenty of time for Kyle Dubas to make a deal. And you know, I know it was early to make the swing on this Ryan O'Reilly trade. There's a lot of different reasons, of course, that they wanted to do it, but now it kind of gives them a sense of, you know, what the market is going to be like, and maybe prices come down over the next few weeks. And now that they've done their heavy lifting, you know, maybe there's a chance to get a bargain out there if a team feels like, you know, they have to sell at the 11th hour, and maybe the Maple Leafs can swoop in there and potentially get a deal done before the deadline. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, they have some LTI room. They could really do some things. We were kind of debating about what the trade market's going to look like between now and March 3rd. And as long as Timo Meyer's still up there, you know, prices are probably going to be high. But I think once that domino falls, I think everything will start to come down. And then maybe then, you know, teams that are just kind of stuck at the deadline where they just kind of want to get rid of somebody at that point, and they kind of have to figure that out, well, then they can go ahead and do that. So it's possible. But yeah, you know, Rink-Wide Toronto co-host Paul Hendrick has been banging the drum about a Luke Shen type of addition for the Toronto Maple Leafs. You know, another depth defenseman. And, you know, a lot of Leaf fans are just wanting that to happen, less because it's Luke Shen, but more so to stop Tampa and Boston from having him, because he was a key part in Tampa's cup runs. So, I mean, I don't see the Leafs doing a move to block another deal. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But, you know, another depth add could make sense. Remember, they've got Jordy Ben and Victor Mete, who's still on LTI with a lower body injury. They still have got these guys, and so they can kind of, you know, figure that all out, and they've got depth. So it's really going to be about what the cost is, and it might come all the way until that last day on March 3rd when the team is in Vancouver on deadline day and figuring out, okay, is there something to be done? If so, what? And then can we do it for pretty much next to nothing or a prospect we didn't have plans for? Like the Mikhail Abramov deal was.
All right, let's finally get to Noel Acciari. We've talked so much about him. He also made his Maple Leafs debut tonight and had a pretty good game, I thought, Dave. That fourth line with him, Zach Aston-Reese, and Alex Kerfoot was pretty strong, considering these guys had never played together. They were on the ice for a lot of chances. Acciari himself getting some opportunities, not able to score, but kind of showed what he's all about in this one. A guy that can throw the body around. He's in the top 10 in the NHL in hits so far this season and can play a nice little strong defensive game as well. But let's hear from the former Boston Bruin who says it's going to be a little bit different being on the other side now.
Played against these guys for a while now, and playing against them now, being able to play with them is fun. I don't have to chase them around anymore. But every guy in here was great, very welcoming, and we played a tight game out there, and we got the result we wanted.
It's funny, every time I think of Noel Acciari, and you mentioned that Boston Bruins series from a couple of years ago where he did a very good job against the Maple Leafs top six, and I always think, he is a guy who has a reputation as being someone that's hard to play against, and heading into that series against Boston, I just remember, reading people from Boston and people that watch the Bruins and were saying, this is a guy that's going to be a pain in the butt for Austin Matthews and the Maple Leafs. Something like Noel Acciari, like who? Like this guy that doesn't score, plays on the fourth line. Like this is a guy that's going to shut down Austin Matthews and the like. And he maybe not shut them down, but every time he was out there, he definitely made a difference. And not saying that he's, going to come and all of a sudden be that shutdown player for the Maple Leafs and Sheldon Keefe's going to have him out against top competition. But again, it just, solidifies that bottom six that you've got another center, a guy that can take faceoffs, is defensively responsible, has been able to, chip in a goal here or there. I mean, he had 10 goals so far this year in 54 games for a guy in the bottom six, which you like to see. But again, it just gives them another option in that center spot or potentially on the wing if they decide to go that way, and adds to the mix of, seemingly 15 guys that the Leafs have at their disposal to use with the bottom two lines. So he's someone that, has playoff experience, is understanding of the role as well. I mean, you talk about it all the time, the identity of the fourth line. That's something that they have been searching for all season long. And this is a guy that knows his role when he steps on the ice. If he's going to get 6 minutes or if he's going to get 10 minutes, he's going to do the same thing every single night.
Well, they just really need some consistency on the bottom six. I mean, the Leafs needed a lot of things, but one of the things that was kind of talked about to death, especially last year against the Tampa Bay Lightning in that 2022 playoff series, was just how dominant the bottom six was against Toronto's bottom six, and how there was an identity frame there. Corey Perry has just been a Leafs killer in that regard, and Bellemare and Pat Maroon. They had these guys that were just kind of in there consistently established with an identity of just not making it easy for any of the Toronto Maple Leafs, whether they were matched up against the second line or caught in transition or things like that, or even able to score goals. And the reason why that got talked a lot about, especially in the third line, was Nick Paul. Nick Paul rose to the occasion in that Game 7 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Toronto's top stars did not. And when your top stars are not performing, then you need to look elsewhere in your lineup. And they didn't get those results either. And some guys missed the assignment. So this is kind of where the Acciari pickup makes a lot of sense, because to Sheldon Keefe's admission, they've not had consistency there, not all season long. And, I do a thing on the SI.com thing where I've put out the lines that they've started with every game from the beginning of the season till now. And that bottom six has shuffled up so much that my hope, and I know Keefe says he's going to experiment till the end of the season, and I shudder when I hear that, my hope is that for the team anyway, that by the final 10 games of the regular season, the team knows what it is and they stick with it and everyone knows what the role is, so that when it comes time for the playoffs, there's just no adjustments and massive changes, because it happens way too much with this team. Like way too much. Like you hope for the Leafs, and like in that case, if you're a supporter, of course, that there's just some consistency with what the lines are and what they're going to be. Yeah, you can tinker a little bit if it calls for it, but don't massively change everything just because things aren't going right. Like sometimes I feel like they're too quick to put the switch, and there's just no chemistry established on the bottom six for that reason. So everyone's got to step up. But as you mentioned, the fourth line and to a degree, the third line, the bottom six overall, has just not had that consistency, not been an established force to be reckoned with for the opponents. And someone like Noel Acciari should at least help in that regard, perhaps get some consistency there and give some support for someone like a David Kampf, who's kind of been the only regular, like up the middle in that bottom six role in the last year and a bit.
Yeah, and I think, the Maple Leafs got him for a reason. I would be surprised if Noel Acciari is going to be coming out of the lineup anytime soon. So he seems to be a guy that is glued to one of those bottom six lines at the center position. Okay, last thing, Joseph Woll got the start tonight. We had wondered what might happen with Ilya Samsonov, but still too ill to suit up for this one. Sheldon Keefe did say post-game that he'll meet the team in Chicago, and they'll see how he feels during the day, and he may or may not make that start on the second half of the back-to-back. But Joseph Woll getting some redemption here after a tough game last time out, was able to bounce back, of course, and get this win against the Montreal Canadiens. And interestingly enough, found out about the Ryan O'Reilly Noel Acciari trade this morning before the morning skate, which look, we'll hear the clip in a second, Dave, but I find it hard to believe that you're a player on the Toronto Maple Leafs and, your friends didn't text you, your teammates didn't text you, hey, we got Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari, like, this is amazing. He did not find out about it until this morning. Let's hear from the Maple Leafs goalie.
Yeah, amazing. I actually didn't know about it until this morning, so it was pretty funny. I was looking at the lineup chart. I was like, what happened to our lines? Yeah, it was pretty cool. Obviously for them to come in and play their first game at home, and the welcome that the crowd gave O'Reilly when he was getting announced was pretty cool too. So I imagine it was a pretty special moment for them.
Do you not have a cell phone?
No, I don't have social media. Okay. So I literally live in the dark with that stuff. So I came in that. I literally had no idea. So.
Makes me wonder if Joseph Woll ever gets traded or something. Like, is he going to be the last guy to find out if he just is completely disconnected from the world? But there are benefits to that, of course, being a pro athlete, to be, disconnected from all of that. But I think he sounded genuine, Dave. Like, I believe him that he actually didn't know. I just find it hard to believe that no one tried to contact him about it.
Yeah. So, there's a few things there. Now, when we talked to Mark Giordano in the morning, he said that there was a group text from Kyle Dubas about the change. And it wouldn't surprise me if Joseph Woll is not on that group text, because he's not. But he's not an everyday Toronto Maple Leaf. Like, I'm sure there's like the main Toronto Maple Leafs group thing for those kind of things for everyday players. And then there's like a Marlies one. And because he's not here up very much, he's probably on the Marlies one. So that's probably what happened there. That's one. Two, the goalies are usually one of the first ones here. Goalies are neurotic that way. They're usually getting their own work done early on the ice with Curtis Sanford long before anyone else is kind of doing anything. So it's very conceivable that he went to bed and just woke up the next morning and did all this stuff. And number three, I wrote about this and I spoke to him about it as well. Like, he's deep into meditation and just staying in the moment. And he felt that that's why, his game has really improved. And so staying away from some of the crazy distractions of the world and the outside stuff that don't really affect him, has kind of helped his game by just being so super focused that, yeah, maybe some friends would have sent him some text, maybe, but he's from Missouri. Like, hockey's not necessarily number one, probably from where he comes from in that regard. And so he only keeps digitally connected to a small circle of friends, he told me. And so as a result of that, if they're not keeping tabs on what his team's doing via trade, or they're not big hockey fans and they're just close friends of him, the person, it's very conceivable that he probably didn't know. And so when he comes in, he does his work early, and then he takes off the pads because he didn't join the team on for the optional either, right? Which was also weird. We weren't sure if Joseph Woll was actually going to play, because it was odd that he didn't take the skate with everybody else, or at least for the optional with the other goalies like Samsonov and Shalgren. And so, it's very possible he was here super early. The lines are already drawn up on the whiteboard, and he's like, what? And so it's kind of funny, but a lot of Joseph Woll's success has been his deep meditation and cutting off social media and distractions. And I think he would have been part of that alert from Kyle Dubas about what had happened with the team had he been an everyday Toronto Maple Leaf. But because he isn't right now, it's very conceivable that he probably wasn't on that group collective. So just a combination of things that make it conceivable.
All right. Well, I think you probably hit all the hypotheticals there, and it does seem plausible after you mentioned the fact that maybe he's just not on the group chat because he's not an everyday player. So he did not receive the alert from Kyle Dubas about the Ryan O'Reilly trade. But we'll see who gets the call in net on Sunday night when the Maple Leafs head off to Chicago, and that will be the next Rink-Wide Toronto post-game show. As the Ryan O'Reilly era continues, he and Noel Acciari and the rest of the Maple Leafs will be in the Windy City taking on the Chicago Blackhawks. Hopefully, Dave, it will not be the second worst game that you see all season long when you go to see this one on Sunday nights in Chicago between the Maple Leafs and the Blackhawks. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at RinkWideCOR, at DAlter, and at RobWong34. And you can get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Hey, it's Ray Ferraro and Darren Drager from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Dregs, we're getting into your favorite part of the year. It's insider season.
Yeah, the March 3rd trade deadline is in sight, and general managers' phones are ringing as front offices are trying to figure out what they're doing, buyers, sellers, and the storylines, Ray, and the trade rumors, they're blowing up now across the league.
Yeah, we got it all covered, Dregs, along with the top hockey guests, twice weekly, here on the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get your podcasts.